Welcome to Troy Draws Things. So happy to have you here. I don't know about you, but I cannot believe that it's almost that time of year again. The pumpkin spice everything is in the air. The leaves are starting to change color. At least I'm told that's going on because I live in Florida and that doesn't actually happen here. People are starting to decorate for Halloween, even though we're not sure how that's going to go this year. And the most exciting, to me at least, art challenge of the year is just around the corner. That's right, Inktober. And despite the controversy that the creator is currently embroiled in, I'm still super excited about it, and I hope you are too. With that in mind, I thought there might be some inking newbies out there that are eager to join in on the challenge, but aren't quite sure where to start, what's the right tools to use. So, in this video, I want to talk about inking with brushes versus inking with pen nibs. Which one's better? Spoiler, it depends. And which one should you choose for your drawing? Start out with, I want to talk about brushes. This is the tool that most people are going to be familiar with. It's, I'm sure everybody's used a brush at some point, even if it was way back in kindergarten. They broke out the watercolors with that little brush that had the super coarse synthetic bristles and was practically useless, but it did the job at the time. So the most popular type of brush to use for inking is what they call a round, and you want to make sure you get one that has a nice point. That's going to be super important for getting the finest lines and getting the most control out of the brush. Now, talk about the advantages of using the brush. Number one is that you have a lot wider variability in your line weight. You can go from something super thin to something really thick in the same stroke without having to change tools. Now the downside is that it takes a lot more practice to get used to using the brush in that manner, especially for the fine lines. Even with a super pointed fine brush, it's going to take some practice for your hands to be able to make those super thin lines. The second thing that you need to know about brushes is that depending on the size can potentially hold a lot more ink than a nib. Now that's going to be great for thin lines. You'll be able to draw a lot longer, but also if you're trying to do thick lines, you'll get more time out of that one dip and into the well. That one dip into the ink well. But remember, if you're making a thicker line, that ink is going to flow out of the brush a lot faster. So even though you've got more ink in there, you can put the ink down on the paper a lot quicker. One of the biggest drawbacks of a brush is that it takes quite a bit of time to get comfortable and to gain control of your line weights. Now, that's something that Inktober is great for. It's 31 days long, so that means you have 31 drawings to help get yourself comfortable using a brush. I myself actually used a previous Inktober to get comfortable with a brush. I have greatly improved my brush inking skills, largely in part for participating with a brush in Inktober. Next up, we have the pen nib, or nib and quill. Now chances are, most people have never used one of these, unless maybe they've gotten into calligraphy. But this is definitely one of the best inking tools out there. Now you've probably seen some version of this in film or television at some point. Imagine someone of the Revolutionary War era sitting down to write a letter They don't pull out a Bic, they don't pull out a fountain pen, they grab their feather, nib, and quill, dip it in their inkwell, and start writing a beautiful letter. This is just the modern version of the same idea. Instead of a feather, we have a metal nib and a wood or plastic handle. Now the first advantage to using a nib, it has got a much shorter learning curve. Once you know how to prep it right, I'll link a video I did up here explaining exactly how to do that. Once you know how to prep it right, the nib takes very little time to learn how to use. One reason it has less of a learning curve is because it immediately gives you greater control over the line thickness. Whereas a brush, you have a lot more variability. With the nib, it's a lot narrower. If you start out with a fine line, you can increase the thickness of that line, but you're never going to get something nearly as thick as what you can with a brush. A technique you could use to counter that is going over the line multiple times to increase the thickness. From my experience, a nib doesn't hold quite as much ink as a brush does, but that doesn't mean you're going to constantly be going back to the inkwell. They still do hold a decent enough amount. Now, if you're looking to buy a nib and holder, you have to keep in mind that there are two different size fittings for the nib and the holder. There's the real tiny ones like this, like a Hunt 102, and there's a bigger size connector that's something like a G-Pen. So you'll have to make sure that you've got the right nib holder for the nib. Now fortunately, you can buy nib holders that will accommodate both, and that's what I would recommend doing. Hope that helps you out. Hope you liked the video. If so, hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.